mating nukes, and then when the queen emerges, she ultimately will go on a mating flight and return. As he indicated to you, 2 out of 3 typically return to the hive. In order to understand genetic diversity, we have to understand mating biology, and that's what the first part of the presentation is going to be concerned with, is the actual mating biology itself, or the mating behaviors associated with the queen and the drones, which she will ultimately mate with. The bottom line is, and I don't know if I'll get through all of it or not, what research has shown, that if you take a queen and you mate her to a single drone, and you take another queen and you mate her to 10 drones. Of course, this is done scientifically with instrumental insemination, that the productivity of the queen, or the productivity of the hive headed by a queen that was mated with multiple drones, or 10 drones, in comparison to the hive that was mated with a single drone, will be more productive, more efficient, show more disease resistance, show more hygienic behavior. So there are a lot of qualities associated with the productivity of the hive that will ultimately be impacted by the number of drones that the queen has actually mated with. There are 3 important components to a productive hive. We need to have a high-quality queen, we need to have a large nurse bee population, and a large field force. And if any one of these is lacking, then the productivity and the efficiency of the colony is going to be lacking as well. The queen is the vital component here. But we want you to also realize the drones that she has mated with is also a vital component to the productivity of the hive. The queen has 2 basic functions in the biology of the hive. First of all, she is an egg machine. In her peak time, she may lay up to 1,500 eggs a day. And as we're going to talk about this afternoon, your ability in developing strong, productive colonies is going to be dependent upon that colony reaching a population between 40 and 60,000 bees. But that's this afternoon's presentation. So first of all, she has the ability to lay a large number of eggs per day, and that is important in developing strong colonies. The second important feature of the queen is that she produces chemicals, or pheromones. The most important is called queen mandibular pheromone, and that has an impact on the biology of that colony, a very large impact, and that could be a lecture in itself. But the queen is extremely important in the life and productivity of the colony. The genetics of the colony, or the genetics of the drones in which she mates with, ultimately will give you the characteristics for the colony. Characteristics such as colony temperament, colony size, productivity. And so her going on a successful mating flight is extremely important. And as the point we're going to be making today is, the more drones she mates with, the more genetically diverse the drones that she mates with, the greater the chance that she will be a good, productive queen. The queen controls the fertilization of eggs. She, first of all, examines an empty cell on the comb. She makes sure that it's been cleaned and ready to receive an egg. Secondly, she uses her front legs to measure the diameter of the cell, And that ultimately tells her then whether she is to lay a fertilized egg or an unfertilized egg. Drone-sized cells have a wider diameter than the worker-sized cells. And then when she lays the egg, either she opens the valve, the spermathecal valve, and releases spermatozoa or sperm onto the surface of the egg as it passes by, or she does not. And so she regulates then the release of spermatozoa from her spermatheca. The spermatheca is the organ in which she stores the sperm following her mating flight, and stores it for the length of her life in which she can actually lay fertilized eggs. The number of spermatozoa that she receives on her mating flight, or possibly 1 or 2 or 3 mating flights before she begins egg laying, is all the sperm that she's going to have. She will never go on another mating flight once she begins laying eggs. And so if it was she failed to mate with a large number of drones, or she failed to receive an adequate supply of spermatozoa from the drones that she actually mated with, then that's going to shorten her productive life and ability to lay fertilized eggs. So she needs to dispense them gradually. We don't know exactly how many she releases, but it's probably on the order of 12 to 15 sperm each time the egg passes by the spermathecal duct. As we said, many are often released every time that she is going to lay a fertilized egg. Been talking about these structures. Let's look at them briefly for just a moment. The 2 large pear-shaped structures that you see at the top are her pear-shaped ovaries. And you will notice that those ovaries are composed of tubes. These tubes are called ovarials. The way I want you to think about it is each one of those tubes or ovarials would be equivalent to an assembly line within a factory. The more assembly lines that are operating within the factory, the greater the output of that factory. And so the number of ovarials is an important consideration. And the 2 ovaries then are joined at the bottom by what are called lateral oviducts, and then you will see they combine as one, and then this structure that you see, the spherical structure that you see there in the center, that's the spermatheca, and that's where the sperm are actually stored. This large structure off to your right, that's the poison sac or the venom gland. As you think about the quality of your queens in relation to her mating, we want you to realize that colony traits change due to different matings. And we'll get into more detail about that in just a minute. So she mates with numerous drones. She receives a large supply of semen, and she only keeps something on the order of around 20% of it. The rest of it is actually voided from her body in the 24 hours following mating. The sperm that are actually stored within the spermatheca will clump. There are layers coming from different drones. And this clumping and layering means that as she uses the different layers or the different clumps of semen, she will be producing similar offspring. But then when she goes to a different clump or a different layer, she may very well be producing offspring that will have slightly different characteristics. You may notice it just having workers that are darker in color or something to that effect. But you need to keep this in mind. There is some clumping and layering of semen within her spermatheca, so traits of a colony over a period of time ultimately will change. The average drone produces about 8 million spermatozoa, And on a mating flight, a very successful mating flight, she may receive something on the order of 50 million. But out of that 50 million, she's probably only going to store 5 to 7 million within her spermatheca, as is indicated with this slide. The point that I want you to keep in mind is any time that the count of spermatozoa within her spermatheca is less than 3 million, she will probably not make it through a full season. Okay? So, and I remember when I was first a graduate student, the first bee meeting I ever went to, there was an Australian scientist at that meeting lecturing to us, and his basic point was, at the end of one season, a queen is only half as good as she was at the beginning. At the end of the second season, she's only a quarter as good, and you can think about, if we get to year 3, what ultimately we'll have. Well, if we look at the depletion rate of spermatozoa from her spermatheca, we will see that chances are in year 3, assuming that she started out with a full spermatheca, that by year 3, she's going to have less than 3 million. And so chances are you're going to have queen problems during that third season. And that's part of the reason why we recommend that you requeen a minimum of every 2 years. Because we know the third year you're playing with dynamite. Drones are sexually mature when they're about 12 days of age. And they will typically start going on orientation flights when they're about 8 days of age. And the thing that we need to keep in mind is that their sperm counts will go down after they're about 20 days old. Well, we have no control over the age of the drones that the queen is going to mate with. If we were doing instrumental insemination, yes, then we might try to know the age of the drones that we're using for that insemination. But naturally, natural mating, you have no idea whatsoever. But we just know biologically this occurs. So not only are we concerned about the number of drones that she mates with, we also ultimately are concerned with the quality of the semen or the amount of semen that from the drones that she also mates with. The other thing that we find hard to believe is that you take a single drone, all of the sperm are genetically identical. Okay? Yes, comparison of drone A to drone B, genetically their semen or sperm are going to be different. But if you use only one drone, so if I was a bee breeder and I'm doing instrumental insemination and I'm selecting for a particular trait, then to increase the speed in which I can obtain that trait within a population of bees, I'm going to use a single drone, do a single drone insemination, and then capture the offspring from that queen. And so that's helpful from a bee genetics standpoint. We know that the sperm, once they're stored within the spermatheca, can live numerous years. We typically say for at least 3 years, but we know there are records of queens that have been held back and not allowed to lay maximum numbers of eggs. We know of queens that have lasted up to 6, 7 years and can still lay fertilized eggs. The physiology, the biology of the storage of the semen, we do not fully understand. It's so remarkable that it remains viable over this long period of time within the structure found within the queen. research that's been done, we're unable to duplicate it in the lab. So there's a lot that we do not understand here, but it's pretty remarkable. In comparison, a queen becomes sexually mature, and she's about 5 days of age, and typically will mate during the first week to 10 days of her mating of her life. We often refer to drone layers. Now, there are two ways in which we can get drone layers. One is, as is indicated here by the slide, if they are prevented from going on a mating flight for maybe 3 weeks, maybe it's because of bad weather, maybe it's because you left a queen excluder on the front of the hive. I know it just went out for some reason.
Battery probably died.
On the front of the hive, to prevent them from going on a mating flight, they will lose the urge to mate. And so after they've lost the urge to go on a mating flight, then they can lay nothing but unfertilized eggs, and we say that they are drone layers. The other way in which you can get a drone layer is that you have a queen that's inseminated, she's laying fertilized eggs, maybe she lays fertilized eggs for 2 years, and then ultimately runs out of semen, and then she can lay nothing but unfertilized eggs. So there are two different ways in which we can get drone layers. She said when she's 1 to 2 weeks old, she goes on her mating flight or flights. It almost always occurs in the afternoon. She circles the hive several times to orient herself to the location of the hive so that she will hopefully be able to find her way back. But as Kent said, when you got 400 or 500 mating nukes in a single location, they all look fairly similar, it's going to be difficult, or it's going to decrease the chances of her finding her way back to the right mating nuke from which she flew from. When they first leave the hive, they fly at a low altitude, 15 feet or less, and we believe this is a behavior to prevent inbreeding, breeding with closely related drones or with brothers. Okay, so she's not drones are not attracted to her as long as she is flying at a low altitude, something on the order of about 15 feet. When she goes up into an altitude of 20 to 100 feet, then the drones are suddenly attracted to her. They're not attracted to her in the hive. They're not attracted to her when the altitude is 15 feet or less. Well, as they go up higher, then ultimately drones will be attracted to her. They're actually attracted to what we call queen mandibular pheromone. It's a pheromone that's produced by her mandibular glands. As we've indicated already, that same pheromone has numerous other functions in the hive or effects on the workers as well within the hive. All right. She flies a long way before going up into that mating altitude, and for a long time we believed that she mated with 7 to 15 different drones. Now that we're doing DNA studies and analyzing the semen that's stored within a queen's spermatheca, we have evidence now that many queens will mate with 20 to 25 different drones. She mates with a drone every 2 to 5 seconds, and she's gone from the hive about 13 minutes. She has a combined flight range of about anywhere from a half a mile to a mile. So she's going to be mating in the area of where the mating nuke or the hive that she emerges from is located. 40% of the queens will mate on their first flight, As we've indicated to you, they may take a second mating flight. They may even take sometimes a third mating flight, and then within a couple of days, they will begin laying eggs. As we've indicated to you, once egg laying begins, a queen will never mate again. Drone congregation areas. These are areas in which drones gather every afternoon. I like to refer to it as standing on the corner and watching the girls go by. Okay? So they fly out of the hive. They accumulate in different areas in the vicinity of the apiary or the bee yard. And they'll fly around just waiting for the queen to arrive. Once they start using up their energy supply, they may return to the hive, take on more food, leave the hive again, go out to either that same congregation area or other congregation areas in the area of the bee yard. So there will be numerous congregation areas, and sometimes the drones will fly from area A to area B, then to C, and then maybe back to A. Let's say they're just out patrolling the area, waiting for a virgin queen to appear. So they have definite areas. And the unbelievable part of all of this is they use the same areas year after year after year. This was originally found or discovered at Cornell University. Well, how do they know where these areas are? And how do they use them year after year? Because a drone only lives something on the order of 30 to 50 days. And we know in the fall the bees are going to throw them out to die. So from one season to the next season, how do they know where these areas are? Well, it has to do with the topography of the land. A break in the horizon, a tree line, or something like that determines where these drone congregations are located. These areas vary in size, and as I've indicated, the boundaries are marked by some type of a vertical relief, trees, buildings, a hill, something like that, causing a break in the horizon, and that's where they gather. Well, obviously, when a queen goes on her mating flight, she's going to be attracted to these areas, not because there's a bunch of drones waiting there, but for probably the same topography that leads the drones to accumulate there, leads the queen likewise to end up there and ultimately be mated. Drones fly at about treetop level. Some of you maybe have been to meetings where they've actually taken a queen, confined to a cage, attached it to a helium balloon, and put the helium balloon up in the air, and that's how they discover or determine where these drone congregation areas are located. Suddenly you put your balloon up and there's no action around that the cage that's dangling there from the balloon, and so you put it up in a different area, and you put it up in a different area, and suddenly you put it up in an area and there's several thousand drones suddenly appear to that cage where that queen is confined. And so that's how they've been able to map out these drone congregation areas. Typically, drones fly between about 11 in the morning and 4:30 in the afternoon. We said queens typically mate in the afternoon. Well, likewise, the drones fly during the same time period. As we were dealing with the invasion of Africanized bees in the United States, it was often pointed out that a European queen going into an area where there was Africanized bees was more likely to be mated with Africanized drones than with European drones. Well, part of it, we thought maybe Africanized drones were just stronger flyers and more competitive. But then we discovered that, no, there was a slight difference in their flight times. And so the Africanized drones flew a little bit earlier than the European drones, and as a result had a competitive edge, so to speak, when the virgin queen arrived on the scene. There's undoubtedly a lot more to it than that, but that's kind of gives you the gist of it. Since a queen mates with several drones, some of her daughters will have the same father, and other of the workers will have different fathers. So when we think about it, that means we have full sisters and we have half sisters, making up a population of bees within the colony. Full sisters are often referred to as super sisters. And what I want you to realize is they share in about 75% of their genes. 50% coming from the queen, a quarter of them coming from the father or from the drone. Half sisters only have about 25% of their genes in common. Does it make a difference? Well, research says in some instances it does, in other instances it doesn't. We've not been able to get consistent results. We call this kin recognition. You know, in the South here, we often refer to our kin. Well, in bee research, it's called kin recognition. And there was a lot of hypotheses have been tested. Will full sisters acting as nurse bees do a better job of caring for developing queens or developing larvae that are also full sisters? And will they do a better job of taking care of full sisters over half sisters? And as I say, our results in this type of research have been very inconsistent. But there's some evidence, in some studies, that there is actually kin recognition within that population of bees within your colony, and there's favoritism or nepotism going on within that population of bees. Queens must mate with unrelated drones to get different sex alleles. Within the bee population, there are some known 20-plus sex alleles. Alleles are part of a gene, or a trait associated with genes on a chromosome. And there are some 20 different ones. And what we're going to say is, if a queen mates with a drone or with drones that do not have the same sex allele as she has in her makeup, it's going to cause one thing to happen. If she mates with drones, with brothers or drones that have the similar sex allele, then genetically it's going to cause problems. We'll describe that in just a minute. So it's important that the queen mates with unrelated drones. That's the bottom line. That's the take-home message. And that's where this genetic diversity comes in relation to the hive. You sometimes find that queens will lay inviable eggs because of a single gene, resulting in what we call a shotgun pattern of brood. I guess I better... Oh, sorry. I'll just hold it. Use one hand instead of two. Okay. We evaluate queens based on their brood pattern within a hive. And if we have a solid brood pattern, we say it's a good queen. So we can look at the size of the brood pattern, for the time of year, and the solidness of that brood pattern. If we have a spotty brood pattern, that may be the first indication that we have a poor queen. It may be an indication that there's been a break in the brooding cycle. It may be an indication that there's been a heavy nectar flow, and not having provided adequate space for them to store this incoming nectar, then they begin storing it within the brood area, taking up the cells where the queen would normally be laying eggs. So when we see a spotty brood pattern, it's an indication to us that we need to monitor it, and we may have a poor queen or an inferior queen. But I want you to realize from a genetic standpoint, it may be an indication of a genetic problem as well, giving us this spotty brood pattern. If a queen is mated to a closely related drone, she's likely to produce scattered brood. And that's because some of the eggs that she lays are inviable, or there's a genetic problem, which, as I say, I'll describe to you in just a minute. But ultimately, the bottom line is you end up with a scattered brood pattern. We said there are some approximately 20 different sex alleles in the honeybee population, and all of them at approximately equal frequency.